Well, as we've been mentioning, the cuts to aid have played a big role in pushing people to protest. There's fears over what sort of impact the slashes to funding could have after a recent study by the University of Oxford and Antwerp revealed that a 20% aid cut in Kakuma camp in 2023 triggered rising hunger, psychological distress, and disrupted local credit and pricing systems. Well, Olivier Sterck, an associate professor at the University of Oxford and at the University of Antwerp, was part of the research team behind the study. He joins us now from Belgium. Olivier, thank you so much for being with us. We've just spoken to John, who lives at that camp in Kakuma. You've already observed the impact that aid cuts can have on the camp. You observed those impacts in 2023. Tell us what you found in that study.
Yes, thank you and good evening, and thank you for welcoming me. So what we found was quite dramatic. What we did actually was to follow 622 households for a 1 year period between 2022 and 2023. And we interviewed all these households 10 times over a 1 year period to see how their consumption, their mental well-being, etc., is fluctuating depending on the shocks they face. And in the middle of the study, so we observed this 20% ration cut. So at that time, refugees were receiving $17 per person per month. So that's already very little. That's less than $1 per person per day. And that was reduced by 20% in the middle of our study. And so what we could see is basically the impact on household, on how they cope with the shocks. And what we find is that basically the percentage of households that ate one meal per day or less increased by 8 percentage points. So after the cut, 37% of households were eating only one meal or less per day. The value of what they consume also decreased by 10%. The calories that they consume decreased. Their expenditure decreased by 22%, etc. They not only ate less, but also they ate less diverse diet, which is, of course, not good for health. They reported worse sleep and worse economic well-being over time.
Well, those are already stark findings, what you found in that study in 2023. We have these cuts now coming from the US and the UK as they pull back their support. How is this next wave of cuts likely to affect how the camp functions and the lives of refugees there?
Yes, these cuts are much more dramatic. So as I said, we studied a ration cut from more or less $17 per person per day to $13 per person per day. Now we are talking about something much worse. Now people are surviving with something like $5-6 per person per day. And from next month onwards, as John explained very well, there will be different categories of people, with some households that are categorized as the most vulnerable, surviving only with something like $8-10 per person per day, and others surviving either on $5 per person per day or per month. Sorry, I'm saying per day, but it's per month. So you have to imagine living with $10 per month for one person just. So it's less $1 per person per day. That's very little, and so the impact on food security will be dramatic. Like you can imagine, people will be living with less than 1,500 calories per day, or less than 1,000 calories per day, and so there will be food insecurity, but there will also be more like widespread impact. Like I've discussed with refugees today, again, in the camp, and they've said that there is rising insecurity in the camp because refugees are now resorting to theft, to violence, to try to feed their family. Also, there is growing tension with the host community, basically because now refugees don't have the money that they need to afford to pay for firewood and other goods that the host community is typically selling. And so
Olivier,
they have to
I'm
collect
so
the
sorry
firewood
to interrupt you. We are running out of time, and I do really just want to ask you the last question because it is an important one. What solutions do you see authorities being able to employ here to counter the fallout of the aid shortages? Just give us that very quickly.
Yes, maybe one last point, because it's related to that. One other risk is migration. People will not be able to survive in the camp, and they will move either back to their country of origin, which is very risky for them, because we are talking about Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia, countries where there is a lot of violence, but also they might go further, which with impacts. And so what are the policy implications? But the main responsible for this situation, they are the donors. And so they should realize that humanitarian is not something that is optional, that is discretionary. They really need to prioritize humanitarian aid. I understand that budget are stretched, but GDP worldwide, it has never been as high. Okay, so it's really a moral failure to reduce budgets, and even more so humanitarian aid, because that's people that are living really on less than $1 per day. So if they have to reduce budget, they need to reduce aid to middle-income countries who can support themselves and cope with the shock. Also for humanitarian organization and aid organization, they really need to prioritize the essential needs, which is food, water, sanitation, shelters, etc. And probably for a moment of time, hopefully short, disinvest from other programs that are less essential. And then for Kenya, probably something that is important is give the right to work and to move to refugees. Like living in the camps with so little money will be extremely difficult for refugees. And so many people will have to find options elsewhere, either within Kenya if they are given the right to work or to move, or elsewhere in the country of origin or elsewhere. And so it's really essential that this is done.
Olivier, thank you so much for joining us on Eye on Africa. It's great to get your insight today.